And we're back in the car on a Monday night. It's finally warmed up, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday evening here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. You'll have to bear with me. Had a little dental work done. I'm still kind of getting used to it. So if I sound a little funny, I mean, you could argue I always sound funny, but if I sound a little funny, I hope that this is going to be the reason why I sound a little funny. I'm still kind of getting used to it. But today is Warren Beatty's 89th birthday. And unlike any other major, massive name in cinema, for people under 40, he's the most elusive. He's the most enigmatic because he really hasn't worked to any large extent since 1998 and the somewhat failure of the movie Bulworth, which is a really interesting movie, certainly for somebody like Beatty who, spoiler alert, Beatty was always very politically active, as was his pal Robert Redford. No judgment, no cap, but Beatty was always interested. There were people who wanted him to run for president, although, man, the skeletons in his closet. The immortal words of Burt Reynolds, I don't have skeletons, I have entire bodies. But Warren Beatty's Bulworth signaled the end of his kind of career proper. He was very, very cautious afterwards. He even joked around about it with his pal Gary Shandling as the Larry Sanders Show was ending right around that time. And Beatty basically plays himself, and he had apparently told Gary Shandling's main character, Larry Sanders, oh yeah, I'm going to be on your show, and then he kind of hems and haws and he decides not to do it. It's actually really funny shit. Beatty was not one who lampooned his image very often, but he did it there, and man, that guy was good. But because he was not active after that, because he kind of went into semi-retirement, he was only 61 when he pulled back. I mean, we talk about Harrison Ford in his 80s still working a full schedule, and then Clint Eastwood still making movies into his 90s. Beatty just wanted to do other stuff. He became a father with Annette Bening, who he has been with for now just about 35 years. He didn't ever specifically say what Cary Grant kind of intimated and ended up doing, which was that he wanted to be an actual father to his daughter. But Beatty had enough money. He'd already achieved enough for the next 50 people combined. And he just very quietly never made any pronouncements. But he did a film called Town and Country, which when they drew it up, you figured, oh, this could be a box office hit, a sex comedy with, middle-aged boomer type people in the cast, although in that case they would have been older than boomers. And that film, for whatever reason, it took years to be ready to come out, and then it bombed anyway, So he really didn't work very much, if at all, and the last film that he did was called Rules Don't Apply, which he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in. He plays Howard Hughes, doing a little Leonardo DiCaprio routine, but it's a obviously different iteration of Howard Hughes. But it is good historically that the last film that Warren Beatty will most likely appear in, he was a quadruple threat. And this is the one thing that separates Beatty from his peers, and he only had three. Now he has two. The peers are Redford, Nicholson, Hoffman. That's it. There's no one else. It's those four guys. Just as for the previous generation, it was Hackman, Duvall, and Clint Eastwood. And now Clint, unfortunately, is the only one. I mean, yeah, you throw William Shatner in there, but it's not. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing. No shade and no trolling of Shatner. I love the guy, but he's not on the level, in my opinion, of the other three. But Beatty as a quadruple threat, that's how he got the 14 Oscar nominations. A lot of them were for Best Pictures that he produced. His nominations were 4 for Picture, I think 4 for Best Actor, and was it 4 for Best Director and 2 for Writing? I think it was actually 4 for Best Writing, but it doesn't really matter the breakdown. It's just the fact that he was so good at so many different things related to the movie business. And the only other person, I mean, it's almost stupid to say it this way, the only other person that did all 4 of those things is basically Woody Allen, right? That's it. Quentin Tarantino to some extent, But as much as people used to get on Woody Allen for his acting, he plays the same character, the nebbishy Jewish guy, which he did, 15 times or however many movies he played the same kind of character. Woody's comic timing was beyond reproach. The guy was fucking master at set up, punchline, and even some physical comedy in movies like Annie Hall, Manhattan Murder Mystery. But Woody, writer, director, producer, actor. It's not that easy to do all of those. You look at Redford, producer, director, actor, and he would have input, but I don't believe that Robert Redford ever got screenplay credit or story by. I could be wrong on that, and I apologize if I am. But you get what I'm saying. Beatty was a special talent, and he was a rare star who was not afraid to speak his mind. Nowadays, we see it, and like Dwayne Johnson a number of years ago got roasted for, going outside the chain of command, whatever that is, like we're in the military. He went outside the chain of command of what you would normally do as a star promoting the movie and went right to the big, the big bosses at, was it Warner or was it Paramount? I don't even remember which company. I think it would have had to have been WB. It went right around to everyone and, went to the top guys to kind of plead his case. Well, Warren Beatty, when he was in his early 30s, a film that many would consider to this day to be certainly the most iconic movie that he made, Bonnie and Clyde. I'm not that big of a fan of Bonnie and Clyde. I should be. I can tell you all about its place in history, no problem. It was one of the first R-rated movies after the rating system, the MPAA, when they implemented it. And as I talked about, the rating system was 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward is how I would describe it. It was a net positive, but it wasn't as much of a net positive as it could have been had there been other people at the helm other than Jack Valenti. Great name. That's a great name. That's a name of a character like in a Bond film, Jack Valenti. But Warren Beatty, after Bonnie and Clyde, and he was a working actor. He had done Splendor in the Grass. I almost said Love is a Many Splendored Things. I would have fucked that up. That's a movie with Jennifer Jones and William Holden. But William Holden. He had done Splendor in the Grass with Natalie Wood, the tragic figure herself, and that I want to say was directed by Elia Kazan. Really? Hadn't the controversy with Kazan happened? I feel like Kazan directed that. Anyway, if I'm wrong again, humble apologies. There's too many colliding thoughts rolling around in my head. But Beatty did really interesting films, working with Arthur Penn for the first time. He did a movie which actually people like me were talking about when the movie Mickey 17 with Robert Pattinson came out. I said, well, what happened to Mickey's 2 through 16? And people on social media are like, what the fuck? What does that even mean? Well, there's a movie called Mickey 17, came out in 2025, right? Arthur Penn and Warren Beatty made a movie in the mid-60s called Mickey 1. So you have Mickey 1, and then you have Mickey 17. So many Mickeys, but what happened to Mickey's 2 through... Whatever. I thought it was funny. A lot of people didn't, and you probably don't. But Beatty, after making Bonnie and Clyde, had high hopes, and he loved working with Arthur Penn, who was a major figure, another guy that is not necessarily that well known to under 40 cineasts, although I hope that he is to some extent. But Bonnie and Clyde came out, and most of the old guard of movie critics didn't like it. The Bosley Crowther, great critic. I mean, that's one of the all-timers. But he was kind of coming to the end of the line, and his presentation was that of a sort of stodgy oldster who really didn't give a shit what the youngins were up to. And he thought the film was obscene, which it was. He thought the film was over bloody, which it was, and too violent, which it was. But you could say the same thing about Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, which came out a little bit later, but right around the same time. That, when I mentioned the rating system, Bonnie and Clyde and The Wild Bunch were 2 early films that took place that were able to be made as they were with the graphic violence because of the rating system, 3 steps forward, 2 steps backward. There was still censorship. There was still Jack Valenti, with an iron fist, although Jack Valenti looked like a guy who could stuff into a garbage can. He really wasn't a tough guy, but he was in a position of influence, and the rating system has always carried a certain amount of weight over the decades. But Bonnie and Clyde got mostly ripped by the old guard of movie critics, and it didn't do that well. And Warren Beatty refused to accept that. And he did what The Rock tried to do in 2022. He basically demanded a meeting with the studio heads, and he told them straight out, he said, listen, you know I'm a serious guy. This movie deserves another run in theaters, and it deserves different film critics so don't have their fucking head up their ass. Words to that effect. I think he probably dropped a lot of F-bombs in this meeting. And incredibly, it worked. The studio agreed with him that, you know what, somebody needed to say it. They couldn't have been too happy that he, affronted them like that, but they brought the film out again. And the younger generation of movie critics, in this instance, people like Rex Reed, Roger Ebert, Gene Siskel, they all responded the way that Beatty thought they would. And the film ended up not only becoming a box office hit, but it became a cultural touchstone, a generational film in the manner of The Wild Bunch, and speaking of one of the big four, The Graduate. So Beatty, in that moment, showed what a charmer he could be, even if it was in a threatening way. He said that Warren Beatty is one of the most charming people who ever lived. It's not just that he looked like that. He had a very modern look in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He looked like a guy who would have been a star in the 90s. You give him a 90s haircut as he looked when he was in his 20s, you can't tell me that he wouldn't fit right in with the Jacob Elordis. And that is not a criticism against Jacob Elordi, but that's how I see it. He had a different look, a different energy, and he got a reputation as a Lothario very, very early in his career. He hooked up with a lot of really hot older women like Mamie Van Doren. Mamie Van Doren, sometime in the early 1990s, I think it was, she got asked about Beatty, and the way that even at her somewhat advanced age, the way she instantly blushed and giggled, that was not acting, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, that was not acting. So Beatty had this reputation of being a smooth talker, an incredible charmer, and a guy who probably had an IQ above 150. Well, he never went public with that. But there are too many different people who could have an axe to grind with him, who always make mention of just how smart the guy was, how on the ball he was, how much of a forward thinker, a progressive thinker he was. And you see him now, he still looks terrific for his age, if you ask me. But there is a sense, especially among young people, when you see somebody who is that old, your first thought is doddering old man, and your second thought might be very stodgy, very set in their ways, etc., etc. Well, in the case of Beatty and another of his, as I mentioned, Clint Eastwood, they were nothing like that. Clint Eastwood was a guy who, on the set of Two Mules for Sister Sarah, on his dime, he said, I ain't eating any of this Mexican food. I'm not drinking any of this water. I don't want to end up in the fucking bathroom for the entire shoot. Hey, laughing, people joking around. Clint had all of his food shipped to the location. That doesn't sound like something that you would have expected from a guy like a Clint Eastwood. But he was worried about his health. He was thinking about it and I got to take care of myself. And Warren Beatty was also a guy who was very, very particular and wanted things a certain way. And he got things a certain way. But even to some extent, unlike Clint, Warren Beatty took enormous risks in his career. And yes, the fact that he was Warren Beatty, the fact that women just fell at his feet. I mean, the closest approximation would be George Clooney. The fact that the number of people who have told stories of women not being able to function in front of George Clooney. You say, well, this is bullshit. This can't be real. But too many people have told the same kind of stories. And the other thing with Beatty, as a person who had this reputation, however he did this part of it, he will probably take to the grave. But in all the years, he was the most eligible bachelor in Hollywood for more than 3 decades. I can't even conceive of how many different women he got with. It's almost incalculable. Wilt Chamberlain claimed 20,000. Wilt Chamberlain, no offense, there was not 20,000. There's no chance. I have no idea what Warren Beatty's number is, but I would say that he probably quadrupled Wilt Chamberlain, and no offense to either of those guys. That was his reputation. And he would talk about it off the record. He was always very quiet and very careful. He wasn't looking to make enemies in the business. It seems absurd given what I just said. But the only person who seemed to have an axe to grind with him was Carly Simon. The song You're So Vain is very clearly about him. even though she never really confirmed that. Come on, of course it is. But there are women who you think would have access to grind with him, and even now, if they're asked, they're going to praise him. They're going to say things like, I was grateful to be in his orbit. A number of years ago, Madonna was on with Howard Stern. I think it might be the last time that she was on with Stern, and she really seemed to, Madonna can be a little difficult sometimes in interviews, but this particular time, she was relaxed, and, maybe she likes Howard, whatever it was. But Howard asked her about that thing with you and Warren was real, right? And she said, what? Well, of course. What do you mean? And so he asked her, can you talk about it? Are you comfortable talking about it? I'm sure there are people that would be interested in what he was like. And she really opened up. And what she said was, he was brilliant. He was just as charming, if not more so. And it was a great time in her life. Like, she didn't seem to have any regrets. She didn't say, well, I was sorry it ended. She didn't say he dumped me for Annette Bening. I don't know if that's what happened. But she also had that same reaction of Mamie Van Doren, 20 some years, maybe 25 years earlier, which was when the name came up, Madonna looked as if she got a little bit red, a little bit flushed. And Stern actually asked her, say, I got to ask you this. Was the sex really good? She said, it was. I could lie, but it was. And you could just see Stern was loving it. He's laughing because Beatty was like one of the people, him and Redford was another guy that Stern loved, where he just imagined these guys must be, they must be King Kong in the bedroom. And of course, because it's Stern, it's funny. But he just had a certain kind of magic that allowed him to make difficult films, take enormous chances, which usually paid off. And really, it wasn't, speaking of Clint Eastwood, it wasn't really until the late 70s where you could say that Clint took the kinds of risks that Warren Beatty took throughout his career. And then once Clint did that, it was a snowball effect, and he made a lot of films going forward from the late 70s. I'm referring to the Any Which Way But Loose movies, which at the time people said, what the fuck is Clint Eastwood doing making comedies where his best friend is an orangutan? Well, in Clint's case, it was a huge departure from Go Ahead, Make My Day and the Dirty Harry films and the westerns that he did. He thought that he could be funny, and he was right. It would have been too obvious for Warren Beatty to do nothing but play Cary Grant roles because he looked a certain way. And this is something that I appreciate about George Clooney, which is that he's made a lot of films where he's essentially playing against the fact that he looks like George Clooney. So my first experience seeing a Warren Beatty film was when Heaven Can Wait premiered on HBO. And I didn't know anything about him as a person. I just thought that film was fantastic. It's a remake of a 40s film called Here Comes Mr. Jordan, I think it's called. And I thought the movie was amazing. Great supporting cast. I mentioned Cary Grant. Diane Cannon. Is Diane Cannon in that film? I'm getting a little bit fuzzy. But that's a movie where he inhabits... Now, you know what? I won't spoil it. It's a great film. It deals with football, and the football scenes are actually very, very realistic. And it's really, really funny. Charles Grodin, who's another one of those actors who is like a cheat code, plays a really dastardly role. Grodin was great when he played heroes, but he was such a character. He was also really good at playing villains. But I mentioned about taking chances. Warren Beatty's Best Director Oscar, I think it might be the only Oscar he won out of the 14 nominations, was Best Director for movie called Reds, about an American journalist named John Reed, who I guess he got caught up in the Russian Revolution, and the story kind of goes from there. And Diane Keaton was his co-star. Jack Nicholson played Eugene O'Neill. That's a very, very unconventional casting. Of all people that Jack Nicholson would play a historical figure, he plays Eugene O'Neill in the movie Reds. But that was a film that was a passion project, a risk, but a passion project. And one thing film fans like myself and probably yourselves know, that passion projects often flame out, and it means usually that the person who wanted to make it had wanted to make it for a really long time, but the studios kept doing the Tom Cruise, go fuck yourself. Even somebody like Warren Beatty did not have a blank check to do whatever he wanted. McCabe and Mrs. Miller with Robert Altman in the early 70s, 1971. Altman shot that movie for less than you would have thought. So that was obviously a big departure. That's a kind of an anti-Western, not like an Unforgiven, but that's a really unusual, an unusual Western. Let's just put it that way. But with Reds, it was the rare passion project that did okay at the box office, did all right overseas, but it got mostly rave reviews from the big critics in the States. I mentioned like the Rex Reeds and Roger Eberts and Gene Siskel's. It did not win Best Picture. My favorite movie of all time, Chariots of Fire, was that year. It was also the year of Raiders of the Lost Ark, for reference. Many people thought that should have won Best Picture, and how does Steven Spielberg not win Best Director? I don't know these things, but given that Chariots of Fire won Best Picture, Hugh Hudson probably should have won Best Director, but that was Warren Beatty's Oscar. We don't throw it back. But I mentioned the kind of politics and the political activism, if you will, although I don't think he was ever as visible with that, publicly as Redford. But in 1974, with a wonderful filmmaker who died tragically, Alan J. Pakula, he had done All the President's Men, Clute, I think, with Jane Fonda. She won an Oscar. But Beatty did a film called The Parallax View, a political thriller. And that's really a political thriller. The political thrillers of the 70s, it was just that time for them. Dustin Hoffman's Marathon Man, the politics are there, but it's not, that movie's not literally about politics. But 3 Days of the Condor with Redford in 1975, also set in the city like Marathon Man, that's very much a political thriller. And Parallax View deals with an assassination conspiracy where Beatty's character kind of gets caught up in it, and it goes from there. But the movie Shampoo, which I feel like the character that he played in that film is pretty close to how he was in real life. He plays a heterosexual hairstylist who gets with just about every hot girl in the cast. That's a microcosm to Warren Beatty's regular life, I guess. I mean, Lee Grant and Goldie Hawn, and I forgot who the other actress was in that film. But there are political overtones in that movie. It's a Watergate era film. There's stuff in there. A lot of it is dated, and people watching it now, they might get a kick out of the hairstyles. And wow, look how young Goldie Hawn is, for example. But there's a lot of political references that you're just not gonna, I'm not even going to get if I go back and and rewatch that movie. But at a certain point, Beatty started to pull back, as Robert Redford did. I mean, after directing Ordinary People and starring in the movie Brubaker, I think both 1980, Redford didn't make another movie until The Natural. So he kind of, it's not that he wasn't working, but he didn't star, he didn't act in anything until 84. So after Reds, I don't think that Beatty worked again as actor until Ishtar with one of the other big four, Dustin Hoffman, and that was just a catastrophic, disastrous movie. And it was written by Elaine May, who was brilliant, but they just couldn't figure out what the fuck they were doing. Dustin and Warren Beatty get stuck in the desert. Like, who thought that? Well, they all thought it was a good idea. And then Beatty got involved, and I mentioned this in episode on the movie Misery, which I wish we could go back in time because Rob Reiner was still around. I did that episode not long before he was killed. But Warren Beatty and Robert Redford were both up for the lead role in Misery. Redford had first crack, and he dropped out because he was convinced that if they did the hobbling scene exactly as it was presented in the book, we lose the audience and this film is not going to work. It works in the book, but I'm telling you, it's not going to work. If you put that in a movie, the film's just going to go, no pun intended, it's going to go dead right at that moment. Not going to work. So Redford left the project because the studio heads at Warner did not agree with his take, which was, you can't do this. You can't do this. I'm telling you, I've been around the business longer than you boys. Bob, we love you. If you want to make the movie, it stays in. Beatty came on board. He had the exact same problem as Redford. This has to go. There has to be something else that we can do with her, with Annie, that she doesn't cut off the back. Warren, we love you. It's staying in. By the time they got to James Caan, when James Caan lobbed the same objection, I don't think this works. Rob, I don't think this works, Mr. Studio Head. I think she should just break his ankles. You know what? We can't lose Jimmy or we don't have a movie. Okay. So either Redford or Beatty could have starred in Misery. The same thing ended up happening. It's just fucking funny the way Hollywood works sometimes. But Beatty turned around from the disappointment of not starring in Misery, and he did Dick Tracy, which a lot of people love. I mean, that's kind of a cult film. What a gorgeously shot movie. Madonna, as I say, that he was in a relationship with her for, I think, about a year and a half officially. They really had good chemistry. They did not look like they were acting. And the thing with Madonna, in other movies where there's a romance component, didn't really look like, to me, that she was that into it. But in Dick Tracy, the chemistry felt real. And I think she gives a better performance in Dick Tracy than she does in A League of Their Own, where she's terrific. But the role is so tiny. You think there's men in this country ain't seen your bosoms? Rosie O'Donnell practically stepping out of character. Hey, this is Madonna we're talking to here. But Beatty's next film after Dick Tracy is what I believe to be the best movie of his career, Bugsy, which was Barry Levinson's film about the famous top-level Jewish gangster Benjamin Siegel, who was somewhat affectionately known as Bugsy, but he didn't like that nickname. He really didn't want anybody calling him that, and the movie takes great pains to show just how much he doesn't want people calling him Bugsy. And the irony being that they ended up naming the movie Bugsy, but people would know exactly what it was about. So that film got Beatty another Oscar nomination for Best Actor, and I have said that was his Oscar. I love Anthony Hopkins. And Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, that is an epic performance. But it's a supporting role. That's not a lead actor performance. And I said the same thing when Jeffrey Rush got the Oscar for about 25 minutes worth of work in the movie Shine in 96. That was Tom Cruise's Oscar for Jerry Maguire. That was Tom Cruise's Oscar. That's when Tom was supposed to win one, right there. Show me the money. Show me the money. They gave it to Jeffrey Rush. Listen, and I love Jeffrey Rush too. But that's a supporting performance. David Helfgott, as an adult, does not show up until the movie is 2/3 over. No, it's just what it is. Anyway, Bugsy was nominated for either 10 or 11 Academy Awards in the year of Silence of the Lambs, the year of Terminator 2, and Grand Canyon, Lawrence Kasdan, one of my favorites, and Fisher King that year, Dead Again, the Kenneth Branagh, a strong year for movies in my opinion. But it only won 2 Oscars, a couple of technical awards, the production design, the costuming, so good. Ennio Morricone's score, magnificent. Barry Levinson's direction, also just tremendous direction by him. Great. Ben Kingsley was great. Harvey Keitel was great. The whole cast, and Annette Bening, that's how he and Annette Bening got together. She crushes it as Virginia Hill. So when that movie didn't do as well at the box office as people thought, I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but Beatty again pulled back a little bit further. He didn't make another movie until Love Affair with his bride, Annette Bening. Not good. I mean, you're remaking Cary Grant. It's a remake of An Affair to Remember. I don't think that movie is very good to begin with. It's just okay. As much as Cary Grant and Deborah Carr, yeah, 2 really great-looking people. Movie's not that great. And much was made at the time of Love Affair's release that Beatty had gone to painstaking lengths to get Katharine Hepburn to be in the movie. In a similar vein to 5 years earlier when Steven Spielberg, who never did this except this one time, stood on his head and had to have another Hepburn, Audrey, in a kind of pivotal supporting role in his film Always with Richard Dreyfuss, Holly Hunter, and John Goodman. Okay. I mean, Spielberg donated a lot of money to Audrey's favorite charities. That's how he coaxed her out of retirement. And in similar fashion, it was great to see Audrey Hepburn on screen one final time. Nobody knew that she didn't have much time left. And as much as Love Affair is not good, the grand dame that was Katharine Hepburn, even in a weakened state, it was worth it just to get her on screen one last time. I'm very emotional and nostalgic when it comes to stuff like that. But Beatty is somebody you can talk about for hours because he did so many important pivotal things throughout his career, taking control of his career in the late 60s in the manner of Clint Eastwood. I don't know if he and Clint, they were professional acquaintances. I don't know that I don't think he called Clint because Clint formed Malpaso Productions right around the time that Bonnie and Clyde came out, in the story of him going to the studio. So I don't know if he literally asked Clint, how did you set up your shingle at Warner? I don't know about that. But Beatty, taking greater control of his career, allowed him to take the kinds of risks that later era Clint became more and more comfortable with. And, you could say it's unfortunate that he didn't work more than he did, and that he pretty much, after the somewhat failure of Bulworth, despite the Oscar nomination that he got for screenplay, that he could have just continued working. He could have, but it seems that he's had really good health. And, to me, the big what if in Hollywood is, what if Steve McQueen's lungs hadn't gone? What if Steve McQueen lived the same kind of life as Clint Eastwood, and he was able to continue to work in his 60s and 70s? Because to me, those two guys had a lot of roles which could have been interchanged. That's how similar that their screen personas came across. But in summation, I hope that Warren Beatty's 89th birthday finds him healthy and happy and well and celebrating as we speak, because he for sure has earned it, just as he earned the last 28 years of a lot of relaxation, a lot of artwork that he does, and, being a father, just not busting his ass 100% of the time as he did in his younger days. So I will spare you the exaggerated wrap-up, and I hope you have a terrific rest of your Monday night. Peace.